Tom Holland. What the fuck? Man, I don't want to talk your
Movie games aren't that big of a thing anymore. Unless you count games that are basically movies, or those FMV games that people are still making. Anyway, game adaptations of blockbuster movies were a staple in the early 2000s. We got the Shrek games, any Disney or Pixar games, Lost, for whatever reason. That is not Jack Shephard. Get his ass away from the Oxys. If you grew up playing these games like I did, you might look back on them fondly. They were a nice way to kill time as the housing market crashed and mom and dad argued over which kid to sell. If we look at these games with a more objective eye though, we can see these games were pretty cheeks for the most part. But there was a dude who had a pretty solid track record for movie game adaptations. That man being Peter Jackson. I ain't gonna sugarcoat it, Peter Jackson movies can get it. Except for like the second and third Hobbit. Lord of the Rings games though? I played the hell out of those games on the PS2. I even have a tattoo of PS2 Elijah Wood. That's how much he meant to me. Peter Jackson's other blockbuster success has gotta be the 2004 King Kong adaptation. This is the only King Kong I recognize. I don't know what the hell is going on with him and Godzilla, but I want no part of it.
This is disgusting!
Jackson's Kong released with its complimentary PS2 adaptation around the same time the film dropped. If I pulled together the shattered fragments of my mind, I can actually remember spending hours playing the game. Fast forward a million years, and the general consensus around this game is that it's one of the better movie games of its time. Was this true? Was this really a good movie game? Or was this just the Reddit hive mind at it again? Well, unfortunately, my 4-year-old brain didn't have the foresight to see the potential benefits of keeping the original PS2 disc after I completed it. I was honestly preparing to rip my face off at the thought of emulating another PS2 game. But fortunately, the strangest website came in clutch, the Internet Archive. Publishers can't be bothered to preserve anything they make anymore, so now we got the King Kong game on the same site as actual historical documents. Wild. The game starts off with this nice little recap using scenes from the film, but since showing this would get me castrated, I threw this together instead.
Name a woman.
What?
Name a woman.
What? God, motherfucker.
Name a woman.
Hope that cleared things up. With my experience playing licensed property games, getting good voice work really was an unspeakable luxury. Most of the time, it felt like they got someone who can vaguely replicate the actor's voice from the movie. At that point, it feels like you're playing as a skinwalker, or if they were lucky enough to get the actual actor from the film, they phoned in all their lines and sounded half dead.
Maybe I should get some kind of spider signal so people don't have to set things on fire to get my attention.
Hey Toby, get that bag, I guess. Thankfully, a good portion of the movie's cast came back to voice their characters, the highlight of which has to be Jack Black. Dude doesn't give a shit what he's participating in. He'll always give 1000%.
Slayer, it's gotta be. Just how do you know that, Denim? That's where I'd live if I was king of this island. A king. Actually, that's not bad. Kong. King. King Kong. Yeah, that's got a nice ring to it. Jack, what do you think?
The voices, they definitely nailed. The faces, on the other hand, hey, but Naomi Watts looks pretty nice. Honestly, PS2 Naomi Watts finna have me humping my screen. It's at this point that we're introduced to like 80% of the game. Don't get me wrong, it's perfectly fine and functional when it comes to a PS2 King Kong game. But this is a King Kong game, not a fucking... what's this guy's name? Jack Driscoll game? I'm not too sure what percentage of the game you actually spend playing as Jack, but it certainly felt like the majority of the time. And what do you do as Jack? You kind of just like chill and have fun, dude. Jack has two primary functions, poke and shoot. When you don't have a gun or run out of ammo, picking up bones or spears and poking the life out of whatever is troubling you is your go-to strat. And I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of really fun. Like yeah, the gameplay gets pretty stale and repetitive pretty quick, but there's also this sense of brutality and desperation you feel in all these levels, frantically using anything available to defend yourself, and your PS2 Pookie Jack Black. I mean, you could probably already tell from the gameplay that nobody really bought this game to play as this dude. I do really appreciate what the game is going for though. Seeing Skull Island from the perspective of a guy on the ground goes a long way to immerse the player, especially when you gotta fight all these gross ass monsters. Speaking of which, one of my favorite things to do in the game is to go into this museum gallery thing you can access in the extras. Seeing the concept art and models up close is really neat, but something about this place gives me the creeps. I remember being vaguely disturbed by this area as a kid, and stepping into it made all those feelings come rushing back. I don't know what it is, but this place just doesn't feel safe. So once you're done feeling unsafe in the concept art room poking bugs with sticks for an hour, you can finally get to the real meat and potatoes of the game, playing as the big man himself, King Craig. It's a bit of a slog to get to, but playing as Kong is actually hella enjoyable. The contrast between playing as a scrawny little Melvin of a man to this absolute primate Chad is staggering. The game instantly opens up way more. The levels are still pretty linear and samey, but now there's just 100 times more fun to work through. The classic method of poking and shooting has been replaced with beating everything you see to death. You can also chuck enemies across the map for funsies. This legitimately feels really liberating. I encourage all my viewers to go out and try this in the real world. Sadly, these sections don't last nearly as long as you'd want them to. Just when you're getting into your groove as the king of the jungle, Kong is ripped away and you gotta deal with Jack and his infinitely less interesting shenanigans. So the rest of your Skull Island getaway is spent bouncing back and forth between throwing velociraptors at Mach speed and then poking them with sticks. There's a part where you play as Kong and you gotta fight against the native population of Skull Island. I thought they worshipped him. I mean, I would. Either way, get fucked. This continues until the grand finale of the game, where Bing Bong gets gassed the fuck up and then transported to NYC. One thing I always thought was funny about the plot of King Kong was how these guys get funding and shit to go to Skull Island and get a bunch of footage to make a cool movie. And then he comes back with no movie footage and a giant gorilla. Wouldn't you be kinda pissed if you were his producer? How the hell is this thing gonna win me an Oscar? Anywho, you do the whole song and dance of escaping out of the Broadway show, or a back alley I guess. Rampaging around is always a swell time. The city might not have the budget for a lot of things, but you can bet they've got the budget for fighter planes. Make sure they got the special Gorilla Grinder ammo loaded in.
It wasn't the airplanes. It was Beauty killed the beast.
Nah, bro, you killed him. You brought him to New York and got him killed. Eric Adams would have handled this situation perfectly, just saying.
You could experience everything from a plane crashing into our trade center to
All in all, King Kong, the movie, the game, The Phantom Pain, was a good movie game. I know I've seen the sentiment plenty of times online, saying it's one of the best movie games ever made. And I mean, yeah, that might be true, but it's still a pretty alright game at the end of the day. So don't expect a masterpiece or anything, just some fat Kong cop.
Toilette ananas nas das.
Toilette ananas nas das.
Toilette ananas nas das.
Toilette ananas nas das.
Toilette ananas nas das.